Bonjour à tous. Bienvenue. Bonjour, bonjour. Hello, welcome. We're going to give a few more minutes of time to people logging in, and then we'll start. Thank you for your patience. All right, I think we can start at least with what we call here les salam alek. So the greetings, wassalam alaikum, bon après-midi, boa tarde, good afternoon. My name is Carina Ndiaye, and I am the new Chief Partnerships Officer at Tostan, and it is my great honor on behalf of Tostan and Catalyst 2030 to welcome you to this convening and to this opportunity not only to share, to build on lessons learned, but hopefully to not only have a better understanding of how we can partner together, but with even more ideas around partnerships as we are heading towards the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. So it is truly, truly my pleasure and honor to be here today. And our co-host, Catalyst 2030, is a global movement that we co-founded in 2018 to work towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I invite you to look at our website and see how best we can serve you and also partner with you as we aim towards this wonderful ambition that we have as a collective in sustainable development. So I believe that we are starting with a few housekeeping items. The first one would be, if you don't mind putting next to your name your organization, so we all have a better idea of what this ethos and ecosystem looks like on this webinar. But also, please feel free to share any thoughts, comments, questions in the chat box, any invitations that you may have to events that are coming up, and we would appreciate that. We will have a Q&A session at the end. However, please feel free to continue to write your questions as they emerge. Perhaps as we do our presentations and our panels, we have a wonderful team from Tostan working on the back end of the administration of this Zoom call. So don't worry, we will pick up all of the questions that you put in there, even if I can't quite multitask with the Zoom ethos at this point. So the last thing or penultimate thing that we would ask you to do is to keep your microphones muted. And also pour mes partenaires et amis francophones, s'il vous plaît, n'hésitez pas à utiliser la traduction en direct que nous avons. Et si je ne me trompe pas, vous verrez le logo pour la traduction en bas à droite. Donc, si vous avez un problème, n'hésitez pas à le mettre dans la chat box et on essaiera de vous répondre le plus rapidement possible. So just to give you the agenda for today, I will give you a little bit of background as to why we thought it would be important and useful to have this convening, which I hope is the first of many today, and also then followed by the panel discussion and by the Q&A session within 60 minutes if everything goes well. So my esteemed panelists are three. The first is Madame Louise Cord, who is the Global Director of the World Bank at the World Bank in Social Sustainability and Inclusion. Monsieur Alexander Kyerematen, who is the Senior Regional Director for the Africa Portfolio of the Global Fund for Children, and my wonderful colleague and senior leader, co-senior leader, Yussuf Sane from Guinea-Bissau, who will be participating to the initial conversation that we will have around partnerships and how they serve the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So why are we here today, and why did we feel in collaboration with Catalyst 2030 that it was important to get your feedback, to get also information from experts who work on community-led development, who work on community-based capacity building? Why today? Well, Tostan is 32 years old as of Tuesday, and we are also launching our new strategy as we speak today, after 30 years of learning and listening. So although it is common today to say we all belong to organizations or initiatives that are learning-based, I think one thing that we've done consistently is also listening. And so after 32 years, our organization, Tostan, which is West Africa, based in Africa, and working with community to empower them and actually to participate and support their own empowerment when it comes to the achievement of their vision, of their goals, to the facing of the opportunities to grow in their development. We've been working for dignity for all for the past 32 years, and we thought it would be fitting at this inflection point of learning and listening as we launch our new strategy 2023-2030 to convene and look at the past, but also talk about the present while looking towards the future. And in this case, the future of which we speak are the Sustainable Development Goals. So why do we feel as if this is an inflection point? It's because we've worked with over 3,000 partner communities since 1991. We've reached over 5 million people in 9 countries, and we have supported and worked with 30,000 women who ended up taking up leadership positions, while also being trained at our TTC. Part of the cohort of the TTC trainees and alumni that we have of 900 people in 50 nationalities are truly working towards sustaining their communities in their vision of what well-being is today. So that is part of the reason why today Tostan and Catalyst 2030 wanted to take a minute to reflect and also to get information and to hear from you all about what partnerships mean. So if we're looking at our conversation within a framework, on the global level today, our feuille de route or our roadmap are the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we take an organization like Tostan, we are best known for our role, support, our intervention in gender equality and gender equity, which if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals is number 11, if I'm not mistaken.
5.
Five. Thank you, Elena. 5. But if you look at how the Sustainable Development Goals were designed, it is actually an interwoven ecosystem of actors, of initiatives, and of priorities and objectives that are connected to each other in a way that is undeniable. So although today the focus of our strategy is partnerships, which relates to the SDG number 17. This time I did make a mistake. We are really working on many SDGs at the same time. So the holistic nature of our framework at the global level also reflects the holistic nature of the work that we all do. So Tostan, Catalyst 2030 are examples of organizations that work to address the multidimensionality of the human-centered design when it comes to sustainable development. But at the end of the day, most of us work in an interwoven manner when it comes to sustainable development goals and supporting our partners and our communities that we work with. So why is it important for us to have the conversation around what is now not only the SDG framework, but what is called the South to South development framework? It's basically an acknowledgement at the global level that where we see opportunities and challenges, the solutions are also to be built, supported, and highlighted within that ecosystem, that the support that we provide, the resources that we wish to connect with our partner communities, the actors that we would like to help build capacity and to help support don't always have to come from the outside, but there is a localized and a contextualized approach that reflects a systematic way to build sustainability into movement, whether it's community-based, whether it's gender-based, whether it's economically based or environmentally based. So it is really a logical, almost a logical framework that if the feuille de route is multidimensional and interconnected, if the human and the collectivities that are being talked about and supported are also multidimensional, that the support that we provide be multi-sectoral, multidimensional, and multi-layered. So this is a good example, this beautiful picture taken in Guinea-Bissau in one of the inter-village convenings where this very diverse group was discussing the impact on women and girls of certain key issues like female genital cutting, like child marriage, and like women in positions of leadership and the impact that it has at the community level. So what we do at Tostan is to support this system that is organically community-based, but also bringing together the resources, the actors, and the initiatives that can help support what is built societally, functionally, and relationally. So we've tried to illustrate what we've learned in 32 years by listening to the community and working within the community for the community. And what we've noticed is that there are, amongst others, but there are two key dimensions to community well-being and its framework. One is functional, one is relational. So the functional really looks at what is needed for survival and what is needed to thrive by the community. And these are our priorities, values, and issues that have been brought to our attention by the community. And we've also looked at the relational aspect, which is not always highlighted as key for how people relate to each other, treat each other, building around the values that they hold dear and the priorities that they have, the challenges that they have, and the opportunities that they have identified within their vision for well-being as priority. So these are the two dimensions that we feel are key in understanding what the framework as defined by the community looks like and after 32 years of studying and serving the community. So it is now my great, great pleasure to start the panel discussion. And what we have, just so you have a framework around what we're going to do, we're going to ask 3 questions to our panelists. And I see that there's a hand up or a question. Yes, Elena?
Yes, thank you, Carina, so much for this amazing introduction. I just wanted to say that we have a little technical glitch on the chat box. And I know many of you want to say many things. And so we have to use the Q&A box in order to be able to do that. The technical team has tried to troubleshoot, but as usual, there is always a little glitch. So that doesn't stop us to discuss and to have a nice conversation, even in the chat box. So just use Q&A, please. Thank you, Carina. Sorry for stepping in.
My pleasure. I could also just, if it's going to help streamline the questions, we could also send it to one email address in particular, and then we'll take it from there. How does that sound? in case we just have issues still in the chat. So, all right. So my first question will be for you, Louise. First of all, thank you so much for being here today. We know that it was a logistical gymnastic to get to us, so we appreciate your time. We appreciate your expertise. And in looking at some of the op-eds that you have authored or co-authored, there is a focus on the ethos around sustainability and how social sustainability is key within the other aspects of sustainable development, which would be economic and also cultural. But there is a focus or onus on how social sustainability is interesting and crucial. So how does that fit with partnerships? Over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Carina. Thank you, Elena, and my friends from Tostan. It's really exciting to be here today representing the World Bank, but also just engaging in this important moment of 30 years of Tostan and their new strategy, which is great because it's all about partnerships and going to scale. And that's exactly where we are at. But let me take just a step back. And, when we started to work on this topic of social sustainability, we went way back to the beginning of mankind, actually, and looked at development. I won't go back there, don't worry. But just to say in a nutshell, which is not surprising, development is all about change. It is a very dynamic process, as you all know on this call, where people are both the means and the ends, the principal agents, as we say in economics, and the key actors. And it's great because development can improve well-being. It can lead to many more opportunities. But I think we also know, and particularly those on this call, that it also can lead to changes and values and threaten existing norms and ways of doing things. And that can create social tensions. And at times, these social tensions can grow so strong that they may even reverse some of the gains of the development process. So as we stand here now, all of us facing limited progress on the SDGs, huge global challenges around climate, around COVID, around conflict and migration, how we manage this change process is absolutely critical. And the way many of us in development have been doing it is a huge focus on growth and redistribution, investment in human capital, and make markets work better. And let me be honest, not only because I represent the World Bank, that is important. But we also know that's not enough. We need to be looking at environmental sustainability, and increasingly that is reflected. Maybe not enough, but it is increasingly into the development paradigm. But we would also say we need to achieve that, to put the right policies in place, and to ensure that everyone benefits and contributes. We need social sustainability. So you're saying, okay, that sounds right. We all agree with that. But what do you mean by social sustainability? And I'll get to the partnerships because it's absolutely key, but just bear with me. Social sustainability is when people feel part of development and believe that they and their descendants are going to benefit from it. Communities and societies that are more socially sustainable are able to come together to address collective challenges such as drought or flooding or the health and well-being of adolescent girls and their education in a way that all people thrive and that is perceived to be fair and legitimate. Now, this actually unpacks itself further into 4 different areas. First is that all people may thrive. That's inclusion, access to markets, access to services, and access to political and cultural spaces, voice. That's absolutely key. Nobody can be left behind. But we also know that over time, that deals with resilience. If you're constantly facing a crisis, a shock from weather, or you're unsafe because you're exposed to violence, it's very difficult to thrive no matter what access to services you have. So we need resilience. That's the second part. But coming together as a collective, we all know in the world today, in communities today, more or less, and also across countries, taking collective action requires trust. Trust at the community level, trust with your next door community, and trust with local government, and trust with the central government. We call that social cohesion. That's the third part of social sustainability. And finally, what we call, and I know the term sounds kind of geeky, process legitimacy. It's that decisions are taken that are deemed to be fair and legitimate. And that means that authority figures have credibility, whoever they may be, that they take decisions that are participatory and transparent, that they are aligned with values and norms and informal and formal rules, and that people benefit. Now, we know that that's not always present, and there is no cookie cutter solution. It's not like you're not either socially sustainable or not. First of all, you can work on any 4 of these dimensions to advance social sustainability. And some countries are willing to push more than on one than on others. Some countries have such fragmented process legitimacy that you need to work getting the groups together at the community level often, or at the national level. Other places, there's a complete vacuum, and you need to come in with services from the International Red Cross and Save the Children, big NGOs who deliver services, and the UN. And in other places, it's challenged. You may have some forms of process legitimacy, but there are values and changes that are challenging, and you need to open up the political and cultural spaces for people to participate and bring in different groups and actors to the policy arena. So clearly, no one size fits all. It's an aspirational goal, but what are the SDGs if not aspirational? And we say that you need to be working in these areas to advance on the SDGs and to address today's global challenges. But how do you work on these areas? And that's where I come in on the partnership sides. That's where the partnerships are absolutely key. On inclusion, reaching the last mile. When I was in Senegal, the government has a very successful nutrition program. We worked with CSOs. We hired local CSOs to deliver the last mile service delivery. I'm actually here now in India working. Today I was on a gender economic empowerment project, which was fascinating. And it was all about bringing together different services across government. So the partnership was across government services on gender-based violence, shelters for the elderly and for orphan adolescent girls, subsidies to go to college, not only in high school, but now they're giving them to go to college, vocational training, childcare, etc. So partnerships to ensure inclusion, because it requires in multi-sectoral approaches to lift the various barriers often that people face. Or sometimes partnerships with international NGOs. We work a lot with ONCE, a Spanish NGO that works on disability and does amazing work advancing disability integration, particularly in the labor markets. We're now in Ethiopia working to provide services for gender-based violence in Tigray, collaborating with UNDP. So clearly for us in the World Bank and as a global community, inclusion, reaching groups that are traditionally don't have access to markets and services, and require a multiple set of services and require structural reforms often, is not something one group necessarily can do at scale. You can do it maybe, and that's for us in the World Bank. Partnerships are key at that level. We also work a lot. People at the bank said initially, what social cohesion, trust, what do we do on that? Actually, we do a whole lot. At the community level, we're trying more and more. In fact, we're using the Tostan model. I'm encouraging my teams to work more and more on this idea of values and bringing CSOs together with our project teams to help envision what a community should look like. Working with CSOs at the community level to build trust. Also in places like the Philippines, in the southern Philippines, where there's conflict at the community level between different ethnic groups, we're working with CSOs to do mediation and to get the groups together to work out common challenges. Or in the Sahel, where we're doing something similar with pastoralists and farmers as the desert encroaches on farmland and the herders go south, as you know. We also work, and again, I try to encourage my teams to model themselves after the work of Tostan, between communities and government. And more, our programs are not just going directly to communities, as we used to do with community-driven development and give a grant to a community and say, here, you go do something. We're working to link the communities to the local government, but we also need to help and work with local actors who can help support communities better engage with local government. At the level of hosts, we're seeing more and more with today's challenges around climate and conflict, migration, and internally and displaced people. And we have that on our minds today as we think about Turkey and Syria. Here we work obviously a lot with the UN agencies, but we also work with local actors in the private sector to provide services, not only to the refugees, believe it or not, but also to the host communities who sometimes find themselves more disadvantaged than the refugee communities. So to build we've seen that you end up having economic growth and well-being that benefits both refugees and hosts, where services are provided to both sets of communities. And then at the societal level, for us in the World Bank, more and more cohesion needs to be drawn at the country level around the climate agenda. We are working in South Africa to support the Presidential Commission on Climate Change. Here in India, we have some state-led commissions on climate change with the goal of bringing the trade unions, the coal mine, the coal ministry, the energy ministry, the community organizations, the women's groups that will be affected, and the think tanks thinking about this, and the different political actors to come together to build consensus that action is needed to go to a low carbon economy, something that many of these places don't want to do, but realize it's inevitable. And this process of bringing in partnerships and building a coalition and stakeholder platforms at a national level is critical. The EU is also doing it with climate dialogues across the region. And this is something we need to work on more with, and they need to be owned and led by countries, but we need to ensure that they involve a broad range of stakeholders in that process. And just to add, at the global level, it's also important around the climate agenda. In the next 3 decades, we're going to be spending trillions on climate change, absolute trillions. And we don't want to be in 2050 and say, oh, that was a missed opportunity for women, for indigenous communities, for ethnic minorities, for LGBTI communities, for persons with disabilities. They didn't quite partake in the new green economy. We need to make sure that the money is well spent, that governments and private sector actors are accountable, and that the beneficiaries and communities most impacted are involved. And that again requires stakeholder engagement platforms at a global level. Let me move on, and tell me if I'm running out of time. I just have 2 more to go through, but send me a note. I'm on 11 minutes, I got it. Okay, so let me go faster. We also work on the resilience agenda, and there again, it's about locally led climate action and bringing together a multitude of different actors and agencies, whether it's agriculture and water or urban, and working again with the local community actors and making sure that women who tend to be very impacted by climate impacts in Africa in particular, and around the world in countries where adaptation is key, are involved in those discussions. Also around GBV, clearly labor rights, child labor, where we need to work with the private sector and with CSOs to make sure in places like Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, that in Ghana, that the rights are protected under resilience. And finally, process legitimacy, which is perhaps the most complicated, but given that I'm on 11 minutes, I better rush simply to say, I talked a lot about the processes in building the stakeholder engagement platforms. That is actually part of the just transition, making sure communities who are impacted directly by closure of coal mines and power plants are involved, but making sure that communities also get the information, have the wherewithal to understand what's going to happen and to be able to act is absolutely key to ensure that the transition is just and that there's a sense of process legitimacy. So just to say that we in the bank have come up with this roadmap around social sustainability. It's been presented to senior management, highly supportive, presented a week ago to our board of directors, highly supportive. But now as we go out, we're like Tostan, it's going to be all about building partnerships with key actors to change the development paradigm and how we work on this issue, because the time is running out, both for the SDGs and on these global agendas. And we need to ensure that they are socially sustainable. So thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Louise. Much, much appreciated. I am going to have, you know, how in school they give you like 4 points that you need to take away from very informative presentations. One of the things that surprised me the most about your presentation was the emphasis on trust. I think it's an implicit value that we all espouse and infuse in our programming, but that isn't always talked about in an explicit manner. And that's where organizations such as ours can do an even better job at listening. And I like the contextualized approach that is also reflective of the context, realities, and opportunities, and the multi-sectoral, multi and cross-sectoral and departmental engagement for stakeholders, which is key and transversal to most of what most of us do, and to end an efficient and efficacious resource management system that is based on understanding not only the current realities, but what is coming in the future. And that is done under a partnerships umbrella in order to have a holistic picture. So thank you so much, very much appreciated. So Alex, over to you. As a proponent of community capacity building practices and mechanisms and reinforcement, we look forward also to your input on how to galvanize this movement, community-led movement, and partnerships in their role in this dynamisation. I'm going to just switch languages. Over to you, Alex. Merci.
Thank you, Carina, and greetings to everyone. It's a privilege to be part of this panel, and I'd like to thank Tostan for convening us to contribute to this important conversation. We're probably in the 8th year of implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And as I understand it, one of the considerations for reimagining from Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals was to create a more people-centered development agenda that supports and benefits everyone. We've come a long way, but as Louise touched on, we've not sort of hit the heights that we expected, and it didn't help with the ongoing pandemic that we experienced a few years back. But now we talk about partnership, and one thing that was clear in the SDGs was an emphasis on partnership, and indeed the 17th goal focuses on that and how the partnerships can be strengthened to implement in terms of implementation for the other 16. I would offer sort of 3 themes for consideration, and I'm happy to hear that Louise touched on a few of those themes, as well as Carina in her initial introduction. The first is relationships, and as I talked about, the SDGs were supposed to be a people-centered framework, which you can see in how it's been articulated. But in my humble opinion, it's falling a bit short on how that manifests in reality. And that's one of the key success factors that I'll offer for consideration. That we need to make it more about relationships with individuals and less about entities. And in this context, the partnerships can be galvanized more effectively by exploring through a relationship lens that acknowledges the importance of interpersonal connections more deeply. And this fosters the trust that is necessary to serve as a foundation to build on all the activities and impact that we are hoping to see. You can look at it in another way, that personal relationships and dynamics are central to even these organizations and the connections that they form. And upon that, the basis of acknowledging these relationships create the potential to stimulate partnerships towards effectiveness, greater effectiveness. The other thing, which also Louise touched on a bit, is inclusion. We believe a Global Fund for Children that global questions require local answers. And who best positioned to find these answers by our community partners and those that exist within the communities that the work is revolving around. Innovation and brilliance, as we say at GFC, exist at the margins. And so inclusion here involves engaging the unusual suspects, right? And the process of inclusion will need to be at the local grassroots level, because they are strongly dependent on the cultural roots and context that make the change that we want to see possible. This is supremely important because regardless of whatever happens at the global level, at the regional level, at the national level, the work and the change we need to see exist in the community and at the individual level. the final thing for consideration is the mutual agency. A mutual agency usually expresses a dynamic where each partner within a partnership has the ability to enter into the partnership into contracts. But in this context, in the context of this conversation, I would like to offer a dynamic where there's a reimagining of the power structure that usually is indicative of the partnerships we see in this space. Undoubtedly, these partnerships end up being a grantee-grant recipient relationship because there's always someone with the power. But imagine a world in which we start to relinquish the power that we have, and be able to let go of egos that sometimes limit our ability to really work for and on behalf of the people that we exist to serve, and rather focus on the core mission at hand, or the outcome that we all seek to find. And so in breaking these egos and creating this dynamic of mutual agency, I believe that we will then be in a position to further our partnerships and be able to see the effectiveness that we're all hoping to see, and provide a voice for young people, for women, for community members that are important ingredients to create effective mechanisms that will support the change that we want to see.
Thank you very much, Alex. I think that we're building on what Louise started to say in terms of sustainability being about change. And if we are looking at the human at the center of change, and the community that the human belongs to at the center also of the change pattern, then what you were just mentioning in terms of the mutual agency puts accountability equally across the board, versus partnership being a power dynamic. It is an exchange for the collective good, which is what we're aiming to do with Sustainable Development Goals. I also like the fact that you brought up trust and inclusion, which is really based in the relational framework that we were talking about in terms of the values that the communities we have also served at Tostan for the past 32 years have consistently brought up in a strength-based analysis and approach to sustainable development. So thank you very much for your comment. Last but not least, we have my colleague and co-senior leader, Yussuf Sane, who has been at Tostan for about 8 years and who started as a volunteer. So, my question is in your experience, Yussuf, having seen and having evolved in the organization from a volunteer to now a senior leader in a position of not only influence, but even deeper listening, what are the lessons and the key takeaways that you have learned throughout these 8 years when it comes to co-creating, especially as we're heading towards the Sustainable Development Goals, but mostly if we're going away from the indicators versus the person, right? What has the community taught you about community well-being in their own experience? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Carina, and good afternoon, boa tarde to everyone who is joining us today. For 32 years, co-creation has really been at the heart of Tostan's mission. For Tostan, we could say historically, I won't go through the history, programmatically, and today even strategically, co-creation it's a principle as much as it is a process of learning and adapting, a participatory process. And so I would say the first lesson that we've learned, you have already emphasized, and that's to listen to our partner communities. And this is especially true when we want to localize global issues and global aspirations such as human rights and the Sustainable Development Goals. And so listening to our partner communities, it ensures a mutual relationship of respect, a greater sense of we are in this together. And so with communities, this simple act will open up the space for deeper engagement and open up the space to design community-led initiatives. And they're initiatives that will be aligned or according to their values, their realities, and their own aspirations. And so I would say it's useful to have models and to have frameworks as supports for our engagement with communities or partners. But to succeed with communities, we need communities also to engage and to share their knowledge and experiences. Second would be to have a balanced degree of physical and relational proximity. I think that's what the point on trust was really also emphasizing. And so as partners, we should have this proximity to the co-creation effort and to our partners. We have one example where in Tostan's flagship community empowerment program, our program facilitators live with the communities during a period of 3 years of the program. And so this allows the facilitator to become a member of the community, reinforcing the sense of we are in this together, while also ensuring that the facilitator understands their aspirations, that he and she or she is a trusted source of information, is aware of existing on the decisions and how to create new partnerships. And so it's valuable to be proximate enough to feel and be considered as a part of the communities we serve, and also to be aware enough of global ambitions to be able to connect the communities to collective and to global efforts. Third, I would say working through community strengths and promoting marginalized voices has been very valuable. When we working at the grassroots, we learned that groups in communities such as women and youth, they have so much potential. And often they would be unheard voices. Women and youth are quite strong in terms of ideas and in their capacity for collective action once we promote their voices. And so when we awaken and promote these voices is when we start to see the communities coming into their true potential and unlocking really their true selves. Another would be to prepare to share lessons learned. There will be many, and they will be coming from communities. We often learn from communities' experiences, and we share these learnings with new partner communities that we are working. From the COVID, the height of the COVID period, I would say, is that when we share successes of what one community is doing to address the threat of the pandemic, when we share that with a nearby community, this success story becomes the new standard. All of the communities can relate to it and they want to apply it for their own well-being. And so as a result, what we'd see is we are learning, but also new communities are learning from what other communities are doing. And so we see communities learning from each other and leading each other to realize their aspirations for well-being in very challenging times. And finally, I would say is to design a collective vision. More than 30 years ago, Tostan started to support communities with breakthroughs for social change. And today we see communities are supporting Tostan to create breakthroughs for global change. And we recently spoke to Mariama Saidi, who is one of the many community leaders who supported our strategy development process in the year 2022 last year. And she did so alongside government and civil society actors in the countries where we are currently based. And she had a collective vision, which you'll see in Tostan's strategy. And speaking in her native language, Mandinka, she said, with this strategy, we, the communities, are a part of Tostan, just as Tostan is a part of us. And frankly, I'm quite looking forward to working with Mariama and with many other community members and partners to take this strategy forward that we have co-created together.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yussuf. Indeed, it was a year-long, what is it? Okay, it was a year-long process of co-creation, not just with the community, but with many members actually of this audience who are stakeholders in our ecosystem. And if I were to take two things, key things from what you said, I think the physical and relational proximity goes beyond just body-wise. It's also in alignment of values and priorities, and that takes the level of closeness and trust of which we've been speaking since the very beginning, and also the sharing of the lessons learned, not just within the ecosystem of the partners, but certainly centered around creating open space and dialogue, or reinforcing the dialogue between ourselves and our community as partners, but also within the communities in order to create the sustainability necessary for our global movement. So thank you very much to the three of you for your intervention. And I believe that now we will be sharing a video that is basically the launch of a new strategy in an audiovisual way. I hope you enjoy. Over to you, Miranda.
Imaginez un monde où chaque communauté peut réaliser sa propre vision du bien-être, où les femmes, les hommes et les jeunes peuvent s'exprimer et devenir acteurs de leur propre développement. Ce monde existe déjà, ici, en Afrique de l'Ouest.
Over the past 30 years, we have seen thousands of breakthroughs in community well-being, thanks to our empowering education model and its adaptation, its scaling and sharing in so many different geographies and with trusted partners.
Tostan commencé wul démb commencé wul barki démb ndax ko Tostan bi muy commencé ay dëkk la commencé woon ba yegg si fii ñaan nañu yàlla mu yokk ba demaat ci yeneen i dëkk.
With the communities we serve, we have co-created a strategic engagement plan to 2030 that is both ambitious and realistic.
Nous avons développé cette stratégie en étroite collaboration avec les communautés et tout autre partenaire au niveau local, national, sous-régional et mondial.
We are committing to engaging additional networks and clusters of communities, catalyzing the efforts of the ecosystem in the movement towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and deepening the connection between the communities and the available resources.
We are not going to do this alone. Partnership is just at the heart of realizing this potential.
With the community and its leaders, government officials, civil society organizations, donors, and other key stakeholders, we will continue to support this growing movement towards community-led development as defined by the community.
Nous avons commencé ensemble et nous avons l'intention de continuer ensemble. Nous vous invitons donc à nous rejoindre dans cet effort collectif.
li nga xam ne mooy sama yéene ci gis-gis boobu mooy ñi nga xam ne ñoom ñooy jàppalekat yi ñu jàppale Tostan bi li mu mébét mu mën ko yéggal ak jàmm.
En partenariat pour le bien-être communautaire, œuvrons pour la dignité pour tous.
Thank you very much. I hope that you enjoy this video as much as I enjoy it every time I see it. And we don't have much time, but I wanted to send a couple of questions your way, panelists, if you're okay with it. So perhaps we start with Louise. Is that okay? All right, so I'm going to read the question, and it will put two questions in one for you. Do you find it hard to persuade others within the World Bank who may want to look at more measurable impacts about the importance of social sustainability? And to what extent is inequality impacting the trust and relationships needed to achieve lasting change? And because I'm hoping to have one question per panelist, we'll do about 2 to 3 minute answers. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I'll be quick. So let me just take the first. Trust is declining. Trust is at, there's some indicators we have that show that trust is at its lowest level globally since it's been measured since 1984. Global inequality between countries is at a highest level since about we've been measuring this. It's really peaked after COVID, a bit also after the years before. And yes, the two are interrelated. And the fact that we're seeing declines in trust means that it's harder to have global collective action. And clearly the rising inequality is linked to higher levels of mistrust. So that is, but all the dimensions of social sustainability work together, ideally to support one another. And that's why so much attention though has been on inclusion, which is key to closing these gaps, but also the other dimensions. I mean, it's a longer discussion, so let me stop there in the interest of time. The quick answer to the question about the World Bank is yes and no. Senior management was incredibly supportive. So was the board. They both asked, what are you doing now? What are your next steps? How are you operationalizing this strategy? Yet at the same time, when it comes to dealing with country directors and country programs where the money comes from in the World Bank, they're like, oh, I want a road, I want a school, I want girls empowerment, maybe, it would be pushing it, but they'll do that. But, talking about these concepts, which are more about the how of development, are difficult, or investing in a stakeholder engagement platform for the World Bank and supporting a client to do that. So for that, just real quickly, we're looking to build up the evidence base and come up with indicators for resilience at the community level, indicators for social cohesion that we're looking at in our projects. Same, we're a single indicator on inclusion. And as well, we're seeing what we can do in process legitimacy. We're just starting. We want to be able to measure these things so that we can have do impact evaluations of our interventions, show that when we put attention on these variables and on the how of development, we get better results. So let me stop there and just say, when I watched that beautiful video, all I could think of is one of my favorite Wolof expressions, Nyofar. So back to you. Thank you so much. And thanks.
Thank you. Well appreciated. Well understood as well. Alex, the question that I will lobby your way is, what advice would you give to grassroots African organizations which are looking to build more partnerships to have a greater impact? And in an effort to change the way we work as organizations and partners, we can create burdensome bureaucratic processes that lose the essence of what the change, hopes to achieve. Alternatively, these processes can be translated into checklists with the same results. So how do you propose institution approach work on partnerships to avoid this? Do I need to repeat?
Let me take a shot. I did, okay. But let me take a shot at it as best as I can in the interest of time. So the first part is quite simple in my opinion. One thing is, don't relegate the concept of partnerships to just funders. Unfortunately, there's a tendency of seeing your peer organizations as competitors. And I always say to our partners and other stakeholders, we're in the business of people's lives. So there isn't room for unnecessary competition, and rather we should be looking to work with as many people as possible towards the goal of improving lives for everyone. And so that's one tangible thing, is to start to explore partnerships across the board, within your communities, within your countries, with private sector stakeholders, with your peer organizations, because they are not competitors, right? Even with your communities, because the communities, as Tostan, you would share and tell people, have a position of strength that we typically don't recognize, right? And typically approach them from that perspective of, what can I do for you? But let's change that narrative and appreciate what everyone can bring to the table. in terms of the bureaucracies that tend to come about, I'll tie it to the previous response, because the pandemic has taught us that we're very much interconnected. The pandemic has taught us that there are gaps that are existing that we're hoping to fix. But then my hope is that has also given us an opportunity to build more robust systems and institutions and create the future that we're all seeing to do. And this involves having the confidence and the ability to stop and reflect and be able to make changes, even if that may mean reimagining what you believe you existed for. And that means talking to people, talking to your important stakeholders, because sometimes you may just find out that you're actually not fulfilling your purpose, and that may be difficult to take, but an important reflection point that will serve to be able to have you make the necessary changes, break the potential bureaucracies, and then serve to impact it. And then finally, one thing that a quote that I believe is from Mother Teresa, but I stand corrected, that I'll share for consideration and reflection, is that I can do things that you can't. You can't do things I can't, but together we can do great things. And I think this sums up the essence of being bold enough to just go beyond what your own ecosystem and connecting with people to support a common goal.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your response even more, because supervising the communications department, partnerships is often the communication aspect of partnership, which is a lot of listening and a lot of amplifying, isn't always seen with the same added value as financial, partnership. So I really do resonate with what you were saying. So thank you for that answer. And Yussuf, my dear, I will save the best. Well, all of you are the best, but the best because he's Tostan, I will say the best for last. Yussuf, the question is, how is Tostan able to ensure that communities take full ownership of their community activities? Over to you.
Thank you, Carina. I would start by saying, actually, the community has full ownership of the partnership with Tostan itself. Why? Because Tostan only works in communities that have requested the partnership. So in effect, the partnership itself belongs to them. Second is that we promote the creation of community management committees that are selected by community members themselves, and they include women, youth, and men in the community. And these committees ensure that while a group of community members are learning continuously throughout the 3 years of the program, the wider community is also engaging in the learning and engaging in the dialogue and engaging with their wider social network to ensure that when they have reached a consensus amongst a small group, the wider social network is also involved and engaged in this decision. I would say also that through programmatic innovations, such as strengthening democracy and civic engagement, communities have also started to reach out to their local elected officials to advocate for their rights, and they've also started to collaborate with their local government to ensure that there's more transparency, there's more accountability in local governance. And this often happens in the post-program after Tostan has left, that we see communities engaging more with their local government to ensure that they're reaching and they're meeting their aspirations as set in their vision for well-being.
Thank you very much. You are right on time. Thank you, Yussuf. And I want to thank our panelists. What I heard transversely is that the more purpose-driven we are, the more sustainable our partnership ecosystem will look. And I really hope, it is truly my hope that this is the first of many discussions where we learn from each other and we work together towards reaching our institutional, our vocational, and also our community-based goals. And I apologize for the mistake that I made at the beginning. This is very nerve-wracking for me as a new employee, in case you didn't notice, but I thank you all for your time. I thank the team that helped put this together. And I thank Elena, Molly, and all of the senior leadership. Please, 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 let's keep in touch and let's keep this dialogue going, because I've learned so much from today, and I can only imagine what we can do together, because really at the heart, what you said is it takes all of us to do development in a sustainable way. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Jeff, and thank you. Bye.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Happy anniversary, Tostan.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup à tout le monde.